This year, as you know and been reminded of, we're going to talk about the theme of taking time to be holy. And tonight, it's about really taking the time to be holy. We're going to talk about the use of time. Because when we think about being holy, as we discussed this morning, that is indeed the beginning point, where we start. But perfecting holiness and moving on toward holiness and becoming like Jesus is something that takes us a lifetime and will probably never accomplish while we're in this life. However, we are supposed to be actually seizing the moments that are given to us, to take the time to be what God would have us to be. And so as we've been talking about holiness and what it means for us, we've been talking about it being a very practical matter, something that hopefully we'll be able to see and know what it looks like and be able to emulate some of those principles in our day-to-day lives. And when it comes to tonight's lesson, I hope there's some practical advice that I can give to you as well to help you be more holy in this coming year. So if you're ready for your 3 words, let's see the notebooks. All right, when we're talking about taking the time, indeed, it does indeed take time. Time, effort, and diligence. It takes effort. You're going to have to exert something. You're going to have to make some sacrifices. You're going to have to put forth your best effort if this is what you're actually wanting to do and wanting to be. That means it's going to be about taking diligence as well. Because holiness is not one of those things that once you've done it once, then it's taken care of for all times. You have to always be on guard against those things that would violate the holiness that God has called you to. And living a life of holiness is important because of, as we even spoke of this morning, there are so many others surrounding us that can see us and know what it is that we're doing and what it is that we're not doing. So I want you to look back at that song number 118 in your song book. And that is that song, Take Time to Be Holy. I appreciate David leading it and understanding that it is actually what I wanted him to lead tonight, was take time to be holy. But when you look at that song, ask yourself, is this really who I am? Is that me? Am I somebody who has actually been taking the time to be holy? Am I speaking off with my Lord? Am I abiding in Him always? Am I feeding on His Word? Do I make friends of God's children? Am I helping those people who are weak? Am I the kind of person that in the midst of a world that's rushing on, am I spending much time in secret with Jesus? Verse 3, when it talks about being calm in my soul, is that really who I am? Or is that someone that I would like to be? Someone that I would wish I could be? Someone that I would hope I would be? When we're using this idea of taking time to be holy, we have to understand that it's the duty of each and every one of us to maintain that proper relationship with God, that is the choice that I make. God has given me the means to accomplish this, but I have to make that conscious decision to actually pursue it and to actually be this kind of person. There are tremendous blessings that come along with it, and we sing about those in that song. But when you look at that song was written in the mid-1880s. And around about 1888 or so is when it was originally put to music and became a hymn that people would sing. And the author of the song, who wrote it first in a poem, wrote it because he heard a sermon based on 1 Peter 1 and verse 16, where it says to be holy, for I am holy. And he began to pen those words to understand what holiness was all about and taking the time to be holy. And so we do indeed need to be determined to take the time, because no one ever has the time to do anything unless they first determine to take the time to do that thing. For a person to become a master, some of you have probably heard about this 10,000 hour rule. That means if you want to become a master at something, you have to spend about 10,000 hours doing that, supposedly, which means that you would spend about 1 hour a day for 28 years doing that thing, according to that 10,000 hour rule. Well, for us, we're not talking about a 10,000 hour rule so much as we are, as we sang at the very beginning, a 10,000 reasons rule. That maybe that would help us in becoming more holy. To actually take the time to start listing how many reasons God has given to you to be holy. How many reasons God is deserving of praise and honor and imitation. 10,000 things about God and His character that you would like to be yourself. 10,000 blessings that God is able to give to you as a result of keeping His promises. Maybe we could go by that rule instead. And would cause us to bless the Lord, all our souls, if we could contemplate that and rely upon those types of things instead. But time itself is indeed a limited resource. We don't have all the time in the world. And time is very deceptive, too. You've heard the phrase that time flies when you're having fun. Time drags when... I'm glad nobody said Eddie's preaching. But we know how it is that if you're enjoying something, it seems to go by very, very quickly. But other times when things are burdensome and hard and difficult, it seems like it just drags on. That some people, when you're young, you look at it and you say, I have all the time in the world. I have my whole life in front of me. And then when you get to the end of life, you look back at it and say, where did all the time go? Time is a limited resource. We're not guaranteed tomorrow. We know that anything that we're going to do, we have to actually take advantage of the time that's given to us right now because we're not promised any other time. In Ephesians 5, verses 15 and 16, it reminds us that we are to be wise, that we are to walk circumspectly, that we are to redeem or to buy back time because the days we're living in are evil times. But we're to redeem the time. Redeeming it means that we buy it back. Have you ever sold something that you had and you wish you had it now? Something that maybe you didn't recognize how valuable it was, and then you sold it, and then later on it's like, oh, I wish I still had that. Time is that way. Once it's gone, there is no bringing it back. And so you have to buy back the time that you have now and seize it. And perhaps that's the reason why we have so much problems with being holy and taking time to be holy, is because we feel like time is just being constantly taken away from us. You've probably heard the different poems and analogies that's used when you talk about going to the cemetery and you look at a gravestone and you see that there's a beginning date and an ending date, but in between those two dates there's a dash. And it's not so much about the beginning date or the ending date, but the life is defined in that little bitty dash. And that's how all of our lives are defined, is by that little bitty dash between those dates. And how is it that I'm living it? What is it that I'm spending it for? We get so busy. This song, as I said a moment ago, was written in the mid-1880s. And you notice what he says about the world? The world rushes on. In the 1880s, they didn't have lights. They didn't have telephones, much less cell phones. They didn't have airplanes, interstate highways. They weren't in the midst of a hustle and bustle like we are. The world rushes on. People have always had problems with that. You remember Mary and Martha, that Martha is busy about a lot of different things, and she's troubled as a result of her busyness. But Mary is the one who's chosen that thing that can't be taken away from her because she's redeeming that time, that moment that she has with the Lord. Many of us would do well with Psalm 46 and verse 10 that we sang a few moments ago, to just be still, to slow down and stop and just be still and know who it is who our God is, know what it is that He expects of us, and to enjoy those moments. When we're talking about holiness and we're talking about how practical it is a matter in our lives, we need to stop seeing it as being this extra burden that I have on top of everything else. On top of everything else I'm supposed to be, now I'm also supposed to be holy. Thanks a lot if I didn't already have enough to do. But something that we're actually supposed to enjoy and to take great source of rejoicing from the fact that I can be like my God, that I can enjoy times with Him. Jesus said in John 9 and verse 4 that the night is coming when no man shall work. And so He must work the works of Him who sent Him while it is still called the day. This is the only time that we have. Now, does that mean that we quit our jobs? That the only thing that we do is worship? No, that would not be a godly thing either. Does it mean we forsake our families and we never spend time with them, or we never do anything of recreational and enjoy just laughing and having fun at something? No, that would not be biblical either. The Bible commends all of those things and even commands some of them. But it is about the moments that you have making full use of them. While you're at work, you're working for the Lord, that you keep that in mind. That as you're raising your family and spending time with them, that you're bringing them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. That when we enjoy our times together and enjoy the company that we have for one another, is exhorting one another and encouraging one another to stay the course because everything is not lost. Rather, we have to learn how to take control of the time that's given to us. Remember Deuteronomy 6? Turn to Deuteronomy chapter 6 and look at verses 4 through 9. Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 through 9. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength. And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. He continues to say that there's going to be times where you may have questions about certain things. But that foundational principle is always about taking time with our families to cultivate and nurture a love and devotion for our God. Loving God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength takes time. It takes time being in His Word. It takes time talking about His blessings. It takes time in them seeing you engaged in prayer. It takes time. But if their time is always spent at ball games, if their time is always spent at movies, if their time is always spent at their friend's house, if their time is always spent with video games, if their time is always spent with cell phones, then where are they going to have the time to be holy? See, our children learn to be holy when they're in our own homes. And they learn the valueness of holiness when they're in our own homes. Psalm 39, verses 4 through 6, the psalmist says, Lord, make me to know my end, and what is the measure of my days, that I may know how frail I am. Indeed, you have made my days as handbreadths, and my age is as nothing before you. Certainly every man in his best state is but a vapor. Surely every man walks about like a shadow. Surely they busy themselves in vain. He heaps up riches and does not know who will gather them. The most important thing that we will ever do for our families is teach them how to love God. There is nothing that's higher. There's nothing that's nobler. There's nothing that's more important. The world's rushing on. You can't stop it. You look at a clock and the second hand is just ticking away, and it's just moment after moment. And there's no slowing it down. And it just accumulates. With all the power that we have, there's nothing that we can do to stop time. But there's everything that we can do to make the most use of our time. That parents need to show their children what taking time for God actually looks like. In Exodus 20 and verse 8, the Lord says to remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. How interesting it is, especially for our study, to know that God set apart a day, where He says, I don't want you to be busy about work. I don't want you thinking about your job. I want you to be home. And I want you to be with your family. And I want you to remember who your God is. And I want you to spend the day, every week, one day every week, doing just that. It was a special time, meant to be a special time for families, to engage in study and prayer and singing of songs and speaking of God's goodness and greatness. And God had given them a day. And brethren, there is something that we neglect more than anything else, is just actually setting aside a specific time, a day, where we can just think about that with our families. We have to take advantage of it, and we have to seize it. That means we're going to have to practice some self-control if we want that stillness and that quietness and that time of spiritual focus. And so when you think about one of those phrases in that song, and that's what I want us to think about through the rest of the lesson, is about that idea of spending much time in secret with Him. There's a story told about an old preacher many years ago. And I think she had like 10 children. And then with those 10 children and her preacher who was out traveling and preaching all over the country, she had a lot of time alone with those kids. And even back then, kids could drive you crazy. And so she told her children, if Mama's apron is over her head, she's in her secret place. Do not disturb her. And that's what she did, is that when she put her apron over her face, over her head, her children were supposed to leave her alone, because she said, that's going to be my quiet time with God. And maybe that's why all 10 children survived their childhoods. Because spending much time in secret with God is indeed a place where we learn how to be more God-like if we use it effectively. that we're going to look at the example especially of Jesus on a few different incidents in his life and see how it is that even the Son of God himself set aside time and looked forward to times where he would be alone with his God. Let's go to first Matthew chapter 14. And in Matthew chapter 14, it starts off with something that's very, very tragic. Matthew 14, starting at verse 1. It says that Herod hears this report about Jesus, and there are some who say in verse 2 that this is John the Baptist who's risen from the dead. And he's afraid because he had put John the Baptist to death. And then in verse 10, after John the Baptist is put to death and beheaded in prison, then in verse 11, his head was brought on a platter and given to the girl who had asked for it, and she brought it to her mother. And in verse 12, the disciples come and they take away the body and they bury it. And then they go and they tell Jesus. And then verse 13 starts with a few words, when Jesus heard it. When Jesus heard it. He's the Son of God, but John the Baptist is indeed his cousin in the flesh. And he knows the role that John the Baptist has. And he knows the kinds of things that John the Baptist has went through and has gone through. And now the people come to Jesus and they tell him that John has been beheaded in prison. If you were Jesus, what would you want to do? Would you want to get in front of a huge crowd of people now and start talking, start preaching? Would you even feel like going out there and healing people and spending time listening to the problems that other people have? Or would you want to be by yourself for a while? It says in verse 13 that when Jesus heard it, he departed from there by boat to a deserted place by himself. But when the multitudes heard it, they followed him on foot from the cities. That even though Jesus was wanting to be alone, he could not because of the people. Mark Matthew 14, and then go to Mark chapter 6. And a few other things that Mark adds to it, to this incident. Mark chapter 6. In verses 12 and 13, it reminds us in Mark chapter 6 that the disciples had went out and preached that people should repent. In verse 13, they cast out many demons, anoint with oil many who were sick, and healed them. And then you have that incident with John the Baptist. And then in verse 30, not only was it the people, but in verse 30, then the apostles gathered to Jesus, and they told him all things, both what they had done and what they had taught. And he said to them, come aside by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while. For there were many coming and going, so that they did not even have time to eat. That Jesus himself was wanting to be alone, and he couldn't. Because the multitudes of people were thronging upon him, wanting to be healed, wanting to hear his teaching. And so there were problems and situations with people's lives, but also his own disciples who had done great things in this mission that they had been sent out to do, and they're coming with Jesus. Have you ever been so tired, so worn out, so beat up by things, and just wanting to be by yourself so badly that it didn't matter whether it was a bad thing that somebody was bringing, or people are now coming and wanting to rejoice and have joy about something that had happened, and you don't want to have anything to do with any of it because you just need to be alone for a while? The Son of God knew what that was like. And he's going through that particular moment at this point in time in his life. Continuing on in verse 32. So they departed to a deserted place in the boat by themselves. But the multitudes saw them departing, and many knew him and ran there on foot from all the cities. They arrived before them and came together to him. And Jesus, when he came out, saw a great multitude, and was moved with compassion for them, because they were sheep not having a shepherd. So he began to teach them many things, that even though Jesus was being encumbered by his own disciples, encumbered by man, encumbered by all these situations, Jesus still went about doing the things he did because of the compassion that he had for the multitude. But that need of being alone was still there. That need for being alone was still there. Parents, you know what that's like. Your family needs you. Fathers, you know what that's like. You're tired. You're beat up. Everything seems to be going against you. And you don't want to hear it. You don't want to hear it whether it's good news or bad news. You just need some time alone. But because of the love and the compassion you have for your family, you set aside that for a moment to take care of their needs. And that's what Jesus did here. But that is not the end. Go back to Matthew now, chapter 14, once again. Matthew 14 and verse 23. And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. And when it was evening, he was alone there. That time of quiet and that time of solitude took some time to get to it, but Jesus still got to it. And so what I'm telling you is this, is that secret place may be very difficult to find from time to time, but you know how much you need it, and you know how valuable it is. You see how valuable it was to Jesus. And there's many things that may distract you. Do what you need to do, but don't forget about that time, because Jesus was going to send the multitudes away at some point and spend that time with his Father. And he did that often. In other places we can go to in Scriptures, in Matthew chapter 6, verses 5 and 6, that Jesus talks about not praying in front of multitudes of people like the hypocrites do. For they love to pray, standing on the synagogues and on the corners of the streets, that they may be seen by men. Surely I say to you, they have their reward. But you, when you pray, go into your room. And when you have shut your door, notice that, go in your room. You shut your door, pray to your Father who is in the secret place, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you openly. That doesn't sound like a suggestion so much as it does a command. Well, what a great blessing it would be to follow that command. How many times do we want to go into our room and shut the door and shut the world out? You just want to go hide. Here's how you hide in a godly way. When God talks about being a hiding place, a place of refuge, a place where people can flee to him, this is what this is about. You need to have a place. You need to have a place where you can shut other people out and be alone with your God. Here's where that's valuable. No one else is around. You can open up. You don't have to hold back. You don't have to keep it to yourself. God already knows it. And you can be honest with God. You can let him know exactly what's going on and exactly what you feel about it and exactly what you need from him, so that you might understand what it means to be spending time with your Father, because he is your Father and he does want to spend that time with you. This is God who is giving the instructions on how to approach him and in the moments where you should be approaching him. It's much like in Daniel chapter 6, that even when Daniel knew that the decree had been signed that anyone who prays to any other god other than the ruler, that this person was to be thrown into a den of lions. And so we remember what Daniel did, that Daniel went back to his home, and as his custom was, he opened his windows toward Jerusalem and he prayed 3 times that day, just like he always had. Nothing changed in the life of Daniel because of that decree. He still prayed to his God and spent time with his God in the place where others knew he was going to be, in the manner in which other people knew he was going to be there, and they would be able to catch him in his devotion to God because of his prayer life. But Daniel's prayer life is what gave him strength. That's what gave him encouragement. And that was something that was much too precious to him. How precious is my prayer life to me? If it was taken away from me, if I was never given the ability to pray from this day forward, would it change my life at all? That may be a very convicting question, I don't know. But if prayer was removed from your life, would it make any difference? Would it actually free up time for other things if prayer was taken away from you? Or is there so little time spent in prayer that is hardly noticeable? We have to be careful about these things that rob us of our time. There's a thing on your phone, on your cell phone, when you go into the settings, and it's about 7 or 8, maybe 10 places down, but it's called screen time. If you've never looked at that setting on your phone, I would encourage you to do so. It tells you how much time you average every day on your phone. I saw mine the other day, and it was like getting kicked in the gut. I was thinking, there's no way I spend that much time on my phone. And I said that while I was looking at my phone. But it doesn't just give you how much time that week. It gives you a daily average. And it tells you the apps and the things on your phone that you're spending that time with. What if you use some of that time for prayer? Some of that time just alone with God. How much more important would holiness be to us if we spent that time with Him? Let's look also to Luke chapter 5. A couple more examples in Jesus' life. Luke chapter 5. Luke chapter 5, starting at verse 12. And it happened when he was in a certain city that, behold, a man who was full of leprosy saw Jesus. And he fell on his face and implored him, saying, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. And he put out his hand and he touched him and says, I am willing, be cleansed. And immediately the leprosy left him. And he charged him to tell no one, but go and show yourself to the priest and make an offering of your cleansing as a testimony to them, just as Moses commanded. However, the report went around concerning him all the more, and great multitudes came together to hear and to be healed by him of their infirmities. And then there's this odd statement at the end of this. So he himself often withdrew into the wilderness and prayed. Some of your versions uses a statement that is much more telling of the moment. I think it's the New American Standard that says Jesus himself would often slip away. He would slip away. That's the idea of people trying to catch him, but he has slipped away. That Jesus would, in the midst of doing things such as this, would find moments to escape those crowds and multitudes so that he could pray. An example of this that we can read about is also in Luke chapter 6, in Mark chapter 1, verses 35 through 37. Mark chapter 1, verses 35 through 37. Jesus has been busy, as he always seemed to be, and yet also in the morning, having risen a long while before daylight, that Jesus goes out and he departs to a solitary place, and there he prayed. And Simon and those who were with him searched for him. And when they found him, they said, everyone is looking for you. And so then Jesus says, let's go to the next towns. That Jesus knew that if he was going to spend time with his Father, time alone with God, he would need to slip away. As that mother, he would have to put his head, as it were, under the apron and say, okay, this is my time alone. And so others, Jesus is not making an announcement about it. He's not saying, look, in the morning, I'm not going to be here. I'm going to go off and pray. That Jesus just kind of slips away and does this thing. Before important decisions, like in Luke chapter 6, verse 12, that he's about to appoint his apostles the next day. And so he spends all night in prayer. You ever been at a place in your life where you say, you know what, God, I've got a very important decision I have to make. And I've got to make that decision tomorrow. It's not vague. It's not way out in the future. It's tomorrow that I've got to make an important decision. Time is up. The decision has to be made. You spend all night in prayer? How much time do you spend in prayer? Taking time to be holy and taking the time to be holy, taking the time to be alone with your Father means that you're making sure that I don't want to make any decisions whatsoever, especially some that are as big as we sometimes have to make, without first spending time with my God. In Matthew 26, he's about to go to the cross in verses 36 and following, and he spends that time in prayer and encourages his disciples to be praying because he knows what he's going to face. Do you know about the surgery you're going to have to face? Do you know about the procedure you're going to have to go through? Do you know about the doctor's appointment you're going to have to meet? Do you know about your spouse and what they're going through? And you know that this is that moment. Do you really want to face that moment without first talking to God? Beware the things that take away that time. Spend much time in secret. Take advantage of the time that you have. It is a limited resource, and it has to be taken advantage of. Let's go to the Psalms. Psalm 119 and verse 147. And I love this psalm as I was studying this week and came across this one. It was especially encouraging to me. Psalm 119 is a song that we know that is dedicated to the Word of God, and it mentions it in these verses as well. But notice also what he talks about. Psalm 119, verses 147 and 148. Here the psalmist says, I rise before the dawning of the morning and cry for help. I hope in your word. Before the morning dawns, I rise. I ask you for help because I know what this day is going to be full of. It's going to be full of trouble, and I need your help. I need your guidance. I need your encouragement. Father, I need you. But I know that if I'm going to talk to you about it, that this is the time that I have because I'm about to be in the midst of a lot of trouble. I got a lot of stuff that's going to happen today. I've got a busy day ahead of me, and God, I want to talk to you first about these things. But notice he talks about how he hopes. And then in the next verse it says, my eyes are awake through the night watches, that I may meditate on your word. The language that is used there is this, is that I wake up in the morning knowing that it's going to be a day full of trouble. So I go to God in prayer and I beg him for his help. But this is what I look forward to. I look forward to tonight. Because tonight when I get home, when everything is quiet, when everybody else is asleep, when there is no noise, the city is at peace and nobody is coming to me with their problems and their issues and their troubles, that in the middle of the night I can wake up, God, and I can talk to you. That's what I'm looking forward to. How would that sustain you through the day if you started that way? That before it's daylight, I'm going to pray to God for help for this day that's about to be there. And I know he's going to be there. And tonight, this is what I look forward to. When everything is quiet, when everything is calm, when nobody is calling my name and wanting something from me, that I can sit down once again and I can talk to God in quiet and in peace. Brethren, take the time. Take advantage of the time. Find you a place where it's quiet. A place where maybe you're driving, and instead of yelling at the other cars on the road, you can listen to the Word of God. Maybe that's the time where you can have some time in prayer. Have a place where you can tell everybody, look, I need a few minutes. I'm about to go under my apron because I need some alone time. Brethren, take the time. You'll get overwhelmed if you don't. The world will beat you up if you don't. Again, if prayer was taken away from you, would it change your life at all? You will never find the time to do this. You will only have it if you take it. You be in charge of the time you spend, not life. That's what we're supposed to be doing. And so I hope this has encouraged you. What I want to leave you with is this question, is when will you actually decide to be completely dedicated to the Lord? When it comes not just to things that we typically think of as being spiritual matters, but even when it comes to devoting your time to God, when will we finally decide to be completely dedicated? If you're subject to the invitation because you need to be baptized for the remission of your sins, or if there's something that we can do to help you to take more control over your life, whatever that need may be, that's what we're here for. Let us help you if we can. As together we stand and sing, please come.